The Indianapolis Colts currently have over $28 million in cap space for 2025. But there are players that cost a lot who might save the franchise money if they depart and cut ties. So, which prominent names should Indy consider cutting ahead of the regular season? And which players do you, the fans, think need to go to put money back in the bank of Indianapolis? Let's talk about it. Welcome to the Horseshoe Huddle Podcast, brought to you by Indianapolis Colts on SI.com. My name is Drake Wally, deputy editor for the site and co-host of the Horseshoe Huddle. And of course, I am joined by the one, the only, Noah Gebert. I always screw that up. Noah, dude, how you doing, man? It's Friday. We had to kind of switch up the schedule a little bit. I had my daughter yesterday, but this is going to be this is a conversation I'm excited to have. But boy, oh boy, I mean, we're going to play devil's advocate with each one of these guys, even the ones that are a little bit wild. It's always good to save money, especially when you're talking about millions of dollars. But how you doing, man? This is something I've been pretty excited to talk about with you.
Yeah, I'm good. Fun to kick off the weekend this way, right? Doing the podcast. A little unusual, but I'm here for it. I like it. I like doing this on a Friday. And yeah, this conversation right in my wheelhouse of people that are on the roster. I know we spend a lot of time through the offseason talking about free agency and the pending free agents. Like, should we bring them back? Should we not bring them back? These are guys that if the Colts do nothing, they're on the roster. We're kind of operating under the assumption that all these guys are on the roster and will be on the roster. And the Colts would have to go out of their way to make these moves. And if you want to see Chris Ballard be a little bit more active in free agency, maybe a little bit more of that cap space needs to be freed up. And these are going to be some of these key guys that you go over. And when you're looking at adding cap space, this is where they're going to have to do it.
Yeah, and the Colts, while they're not like super duper rich with cap, I mean, I think that they're like in the bottom half of the entire NFL right now, actually, in available cap at about $28,247,239. I wish I could just get a chunk of that to pay off the rest of my mortgage, and I think that we'd be good. They might not even notice if they just gave it to me, but yeah, man. I mean, that's not. It sounds like a lot of money, but it's like literally 18th in the entire NFL. So there's going to be guys that they are going to have to sign at some point. They're going to have to extend at some point. Then when you do draft a couple, rookies, prominent rookies that you're looking at like starters, you're going to need to pay them down the road. And there's also just key guys that make the franchise move ahead. Even if it was just 8 wins, there's going to be guys that you are going to have to allocate resources to, maybe restructure a few things to keep in the long run. But yeah, I mean, while people get into the chat here, we do have the one and only Truett Trussler with a savage comment. Free up cap space. We like our players. #sarcasm. So Truett, don't be surprised, man. I would dare say there's probably 2, 3, maybe even 4 guys that, I mean, probably more, that are realistic cut candidates. But of course, we're going to talk about each and every one of these guys that are going to save the franchise money. So without further ado, we're going to get into the biggest cuts to free up cap space. Now, this first guy, we're going to go from the least amount of money saved all the way to the most amount of money saved. And we're going to bring up each guy. We're going to just kind of talk about what would happen if he was hypothetically cut, and then who is going to, on the roster right now, not in the draft, not in free agency, who in the roster right now is going to step up and be able to fill in, if at all, and kind of what things would look like. So this first guy here, this one's a little bit of a tough one to say, even if we are playing devil's advocate here, and that's Kenny Moore. So Kenny Moore, cornerback for the Colts. He's been a mainstay on this team. I believe he has a lone Pro Bowl season in 2022, if I'm not mistaken, or 2021, I think. But this is a guy who's been a cornerstone. He's been a staple, a pillar of that defense. He's got really one down season ever since coming to prominence as a full-time starter, and that was in Gus Bradley's scheme. Now, he is a huge piece of Lou Anarumo's scheme and will be. But he actually saves $1.24 million if he is cut. Before we even get into this, thoughts on Kenny Moore, thoughts on what his value to this team.
Yeah, hugely valuable. And you're talking about a leader on the defensive side of the ball. You're talking about a veteran guy who's been with this franchise undrafted. I mean, he was claimed by the Patriots, so he started off there. but really a homegrown guy through and through, and loves Indy, huge in the community. So that's just kind of the guy that you're getting off the field. And then on top of the field, I mean, he's had a little bit of a down year here and there that maybe isn't up to his standards, but when he's on his game, he's one of the biggest playmakers in the NFL, and he's one of the best slot defenders in the NFL, bar none, really, regardless of whatever season you're in. And this is a guy that you're talking about when you bring Lou Anarumo. Who are these guys that we project are going to excel in the scheme? He was like number one on our list when we're talking about how seamless of a fit that should be in the way that Mike Hilton was used over in Cincinnati and Lou Anarumo's time there, and kind of the strengths of Kenny Moore's game where he can be that blitzer off the edge. He can be used in man or zone. And he's going to be that reliable veteran back there that can be trusted to communicate. Yet hugely valuable. And when you're talking about $1.24 million saved, I mean, that's chump change. The Colts are almost paying, I think, Evan Hull, Micah Abraham, and Jalen Simpson combined are making about that much for the Colts next year. So, I mean, savings are pretty minuscule for that. And I think the drop off that you would go, I mean, we can get into it even more because looking at the depth chart behind him, there's really nothing.
Yeah. And hypothetical here. Let's say that he's cut. Let's say that the Indianapolis, because we're going to do this with each one of these guys, and some of them fans, it's going to hurt to hear this. It's going to hurt if they're cut. Obviously, Kenny Moore is not going to get cut, but if he was, you're looking literally at nobody is really a prominent nickel corner. Nobody is really a prominent slot corner on this defense. You're looking at Juju Brents. I'm just naming off the depth chart here.
Yeah.
So on the left, they've got this is our lads, but it's left corner. You got Juju Brents and then Sam Womack. And then as far as the other side, you have Jalen Jones and you have David Long. Okay. I mean, Kenny Moore, this is why the Colts this is why Chris Ballard said, we have to do more in the secondary. This is why everyone was preaching, begging Chris Ballard to put a free agent signing in the defensive backfield, to draft a cornerback earlier than what they did. I think the first cornerback they drafted, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was Jalen Simpson, and he didn't even make the roster. So I mean, you're talking about a premium position here now. Obviously, Kenny Moore is the most valuable cornerback on the team. Not going to get cut, but it is very interesting to see that he would save the team $1.24 million. And we got a perp here saying that Nick Cross would be great at nickel. Nick Cross, the only downside is his coverage has got to improve. But I mean, you could technically take some safeties, maybe put him there, but obviously, probably keeping Kenny Moore. I mean, I don't see any world, any way, any chance in hell. I'll throw that in there that this guy gets cut. But at the end of the day, you never know. But Noah, real quick before we even switch on, do you think that what we just noticed here, let's just say Kenny Moore, even just one game, tweaks his ankle, he's out for one game.
Yeah.
This is exactly why the Colts have got to do something at defensive back.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were naming off, you have to just kind of what's bare back there at corner. I think David Long, even you mentioned, I think might be out, not under contract after this offseason. So you're even shorter than you were. The Nick Cross comment, I think the Colts have tried to play him at nickel and get him some snaps there in both safety spots. And he just kind of hasn't worked out. And maybe just they haven't really needed it to either because Kenny Moore's been so reliable for him back there. So maybe you could filter in Nick Cross on some of those reps where he's closer to the line of scrimmage and he's not like man on in a key situation. I wouldn't trust Nick Cross to lock somebody down on 3rd and 6 when they got to have it. Maybe just guys on the roster. Sam Womack, I think, kind of fits that mold. He's kind of one of those guys that doesn't really fit the mold of an outside corner in Lou Anarumo's schemes at 5'10", 5'9", or thereabouts. So maybe that's somebody you can bump inside into the slot if you're planning on playing Juju and Jalen Jones on the outside. Maybe Sam Womack could take some reps there. But really, that's about all you have on the roster, and that's just an experiment at best.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, look, Kenny Moore probably going absolutely nowhere, and I don't mean this year. I mean like anytime soon. I wouldn't be surprised if the Colts try to keep him as a Colt for the rest of his career. I mean, he's done nothing but play fantastic outside of one season. So, so this next one actually might get some people thinking, oh, this might be a good one, given some of the struggles that this guy has had. That's kicker Matt Gay. I didn't put
Mhm.
this on. I didn't put this on Kenny Moore's, but I'm going to do this for each one of these slides so that all the fans can see how much is saved. $2.75 million is saved by cutting Matt Gay. Now, Matt Gay, interestingly enough, I'm pretty confident he absolutely did great outside of 50-yard field goals. I think he made everything
Yeah.
outside of 50-yard field goals. Everything he missed as far as a field goal this season was 50 plus. I don't know if it's his mental. I don't know if it's like something that's a lingering injury. It could be. I mean, we got people already saying that we got to draft a kicker. Look, man, Matt Gay he's got a hell of a leg. Okay, the power is never a question. It's the accuracy from 50 plus. And look, this is a team that's got a young quarterback that's trying to work things out. You're not always going to be able to get these really short kicks. You're not always going to be within 50 yards. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, what are your thoughts on Matt Gay overall? His 2024, by a statistic standpoint, was good. But man, when you look at those 50-yard field goals, there is clearly something going on. The guy just is not very consistent when it comes to kicking deep.
Yeah, I think kickers one of those positions where I tend to think don't rattle the cage if you don't have to. You've got a guy that's money under 50. I think that's super valuable. I think even if you have somebody that can make kicks over 50, it's not going to be super consistent. You're not going to want to rely on that going forward. It's 2.75 million saved. I think to get a replacement kicker, you're going to spend about that anyway if you want somebody who's established. Otherwise, you're rolling the dice on a rookie. The big thing I think about his contract when you're looking at 2.75 million saved, also, they're eating $4 million and admitting that it was a mistake and eating that $4 million with no upside for where that $4 million can go. I don't think that's in the Colts' DNA to really do. I don't think we're talking about all of these guys that they could move on from and to free up cap space, which I think is rare in and of itself. It's not something that Chris Ballard usually does, or that's not really how they operate. And when it also includes you'd be eating more than you would be saving, I don't think that's very likely. So yeah, I think once it goes for a kicker, I think it has a tendency to just be gone. I think you see that with some guys in the past. Justin Tucker's a good example of that, where it started to be shaky at the end of last year, and then this entire season was kind of gone. I think even with Rodrigo Blankenship you had with the Colts, you saw once it was gone, it was gone. And that could be the case with Matt Gay, but I think you roll into the beginning of 2025, assuming he's going to be your kicker and not worrying about that spot until he makes you have to worry about it.
Yeah, and somebody actually says something really interesting here. Gaffia says Chase was better than Matt. And we're talking about Chase McLaughlin, a guy who, until he joined the Colts, was just a journeyman kicker, practice squad kicker, just kind of a ho-hum name in the NFL. Now he's doing great. I think for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a lot of people liked Chase McLaughlin. A lot of people thought that he deserved a contract. But Matt Gay, at the end of the day, man, these numbers don't lie. It's very interesting. So in 2024, listen to this. Played 16 games, obviously missed one. 9 for 9 from 20 yards to 29. 12 for 12, 30 yards to 39. 7 for 7, 40 to 49 yards. 3 for 9 from 50 plus yards for 6 misses from 50 plus yards. And he was 31 for 37 on field goals. All of his misses, 50 plus yards. So I think that Matt Gay is valuable. I really do. It's just when you look at his overall performance, 28 for 45 from deep, from 50 plus yards throughout his career. So it's not something, this isn't something new that he's just, out of nowhere come up with. It's been an issue. But at the end of the day, Matt Gay, like you said, most of the time you're going to be kicking from inside of 50 yards. You know what I mean? So he's been money. He clearly was money. And, it was interesting that Gaffia mentioned that because I thought Chase McLaughlin absolutely deserved a second contract.
One thing I want to say about Matt Gay before we move on, you just reading off that stats that came to mind. Man, 3 of 9 from 50 plus and 100% everywhere else. If you move that up to 5 of 9 from 50, that's 2 kicks. And if you have a guy who's 100% under 50 and over 50% over 50, you can't ask for anything better than that from a kicker. It'd be ludicrous to assume that anyone would be 100% from under 50 and like 80% from 50 plus. That doesn't happen, right? So if when you're talking about that statistically, that's like the difference between missing and making 2 kicks throughout a season. I think you roll the dice and you just see if that even if the number is the same, I think he's kind of worth the price tag, depending or because you're not really saving all that much moving on from him.
Yeah, there's actually some interesting. So it did happen. It did happen with Chase McLaughlin, 8 for 10 from 50 plus. But the thing is, when you're talking about 50 inside, it's not going to be perfect. I thought Chase McLaughlin's way better than way better than people think. But like Noah mentioned, I mean, Matt Gay, man, he's money inside of 50 yards. It doesn't matter if you're on the left hash, the right hash, in the middle. The dude is just damn near guaranteed to make that kick. You're just hoping that he can start to change that because again, your offense is not going to always put you in a prime spot. Sometimes you're going to have to hit a freaking 58-yarder, 59-yarder, 55-yarder. Those are big kicks. Gay has the leg for it. Yeah. So far has not had the accuracy.
And that's 100% on PATs also.
That's right. And you're talking about now 50. I believe it's is it a 32? They do it at the 15. I think it's a 32-yard
plus
kick.
17. Yeah, 32.
Yeah, it's a 32-yard kick, man. That's not a guarantee. But this next one, so this one a couple years ago, I think a lot of people would have been like, oh yeah, we should definitely do this one back when he was just absolutely wrecking the entire 2023 offseason. That's Jonathan Taylor. Okay, so Jonathan Taylor, he's had the biggest knock on him is his injuries. Because and his pass blocking and his receiving. Now the thing is, he is who he is. Jonathan Taylor is not going to be a guy that's he's not even gone over 40 catches in a season. That was when he was literally the entire offense in 2021. Mm-hmm. Like without Taylor, the Colts probably win 5 games with Carson Wentz. So Jonathan Taylor last season though, 303 rushes, 1,431 rushing yards, 11 scores on the ground, another one through the air, 12 all-purpose. He's worth every penny right now because he is the engine of that Colts offense. But he saves you $3.29 million. All right, that's not really that much in the grand scheme. But what are your thoughts on Jonathan Taylor? I know that this was his second best season by numbers alone. But we're also talking about a guy who continuously is injured. Okay, so over his last 3 years, he's played 35 of 51 total games. All right, so he's missed 16 total. Hasn't started them all last year. He did come in for 3 of them when they were trying to slowly integrate him back in after that high ankle sprain. Do you think that the rust is starting to show? I personally thought that they gave him the ball an absolute gargantuan amount. In fact, he averaged over 20 yards or over 20 carries a game last season, which is the most of his career, by the way. What are your thoughts on Jonathan Taylor? What are your thoughts on the $3.29 million?
Yeah, the $3.29 million is absolutely in no way worth it, right? I think this is good to have the conversation because of the position he plays and because of what's coming up next year, right? Where you save $3.29 million if you cut him this year. Next year you save 13 if you move on from him. So that's a big chunk of change, and that's the amount of change that actually gets you talking about if you want to structure your offense around this guy or not. If you need to make some changes depending on how this season goes. We've said in multiple episodes talking about how the Colts need to focus on supporting Anthony Richardson. Getting rid of Jonathan Taylor does the exact opposite of that. Like once you get rid of that, I think the consistent threat of a home run on your offense is eliminated. They're just going to be sitting on the deep ball from Pierce. They're not worried about, at least at this point, any other running back on the Colts roster. So you really don't have anybody to take up that load for him. Where you mentioned over 20 carries a game. There's no workhorse on the roster that could shoulder much of that. Trey Sermon, Tyler Goodson, I think is the best that you're working with there at that point. And even then, you don't even feel good about them being your RB2 unquestioned. So yeah, really, there's no replacement. There's no replacement for the production in the offense that would take place if you moved on from him. The money's not going to make a big difference, and this is a make or break year for Anthony Richardson. So I mean, you got to support him with him.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting. NFL nerd here. The wheels will fall off for JT. Trade him now while he still has trade value. I really think Indianapolis looks at this situation and they say, I mean, you got to think you want a veteran behind Anthony Richardson. You got to have a veteran. You got to have a guy that knows the offense. You got to have a guy that knows how to be a volume-based runner. But at the end of the day, man, I do also like what Goffia says here. We need to bring him in a competent RB2 to take some of the load off of him. Now, at the end of the day, Jonathan Taylor, he does save you money, right? If you cut him. But right now, given what he did last season, I'm telling you, there was a game, I can't remember which one. In fact, actually, I've got it pulled up here. Let me see. I have to. Oh, that's my apologies. That is the wrong player. Here we go. Okay, so his last 3 games of the season, 29 carries, 32 carries, 34 carries. Ladies and gentlemen, that is 95 attempts. He had 218 rushing yards, 125 rushing yards, 177 rushing yards. The guy had 6 freaking touchdown rushes. I mean, Jonathan Taylor, man, those wheels, I don't know how much longer they've got. I don't know those bearings. I don't know when they're going to snap on the road. But I'll tell you right now, man, that is the kind of running back that you need behind a guy who is developing. You gotta keep Taylor. I say you keep him until you literally have every reason and benefit to get rid of him however you need to. But right now, we have to give these names, but that's a guy that is just untouchable. Gaffia mentions it here. 300 touches in 14 games is absurd. 280 gives you 20 a game. All right, so we're talking about 22, basically about 21, 22 rushes a game. That's just a workload that I don't think is sustainable. So you're hoping the Colts do address the running back 2 situation. Now, this next one is one that Noah actually decided, hey, I've got one hiding up my sleeve because I didn't even have this one. And I saw it and I was like, when Noah mentioned it, it actually does make, I would say, some sense. Now, the safety position, we're talking about, a position that really needs to have depth secure. It needs to have, talent. You can address that through the draft. You can address that through free agency. But this one's really interesting. And it's going to be Rodney Thomas II. So Rodney Thomas came to prominence when Nick Cross didn't work out. Rodney McLeod comes in 2022. We're talking about a 7th rounder out of Yale, 0 expectations, leads the team in interceptions his first year. Okay. One of those interceptions was the most disgusting throw I've ever seen from Kirk Cousins. I mean, like, just some of those picks that year, you look back and you're like, how much of it was really Rodney Thomas's ball skills? How much of it was just an absolute duck of a throw? And this is one that's interesting because when you look at the depth behind him, it's not the greatest. But what are your thoughts on this? Because I think Rodney Thomas, he's been a liability a lot, and he's starting to look more like a 7th round pick every year he plays.
Yeah. Yeah. Rodney Thomas is one of those guys who at the end of the year, at the end of his rookie year, he got one of those performance incentives for playtime because he outperformed kind of what his salary was. So that part of that pool went to him. And then just because he was a 7th round pick, his cap number's been so low until you hit that 4th year in the contract where it's jumps up quite a lot. Like, I think he was a cut candidate last year. I would have said that. But the fact that you were so thin at safety and he was only making $1 million, like, anyone you signed to take his place is going to cost the same amount. So you're not helping yourself in any situation there. So I think in my mind, that was really the only thing that was a boon for him was that he had such a low cap number. You go into the 4th year of your rookie contract and not really much of your 3.35 or whatever million he's scheduled to make is guaranteed. I think that puts you at risk, right? Especially when the last few years you haven't hit the field very much, and when you did, it wasn't a great performance from him last season or the season before, or really since his rookie year. So yeah, I mean, it's not a lot of money, 3.35 million, but for a guy that you were maybe thinking to move on from anyway, I think you do that. I think he's one of the only people in the safety room that can be a free safety and fit that mold, but I don't know if you feel good about him being back there as even a spot starter at this point. Maybe Lou Anarumo sees him a little bit differently, and he wants to use him a little bit better, or play to his strengths a little bit more in a different type of safety role. But I mean, at 3.34, I think you can replace that production and that kind of depth for quite a bit cheaper.
Yeah, and look, at the end of the day, man, you want to have depth. You want to have guys that can fill in and understand the scheme and have played football. But I gotta say, I mean, we're actually seeing it in the chat here. There's plenty of safety talent. And I mean, like, deep enough talent that you could draft a safety day 3 and you could probably put them in there. One guy that's actually on the roster that really upsets me, not because of him, it's just because of his injury history. Daniel Scott.
Mhm.
Daniel Scott, California, played 5 years there, hell of a special teamer. Can't stay healthy. He has 2 season-ending injuries back to back within the offseason, for God's sakes. He can't even get on the field. That's a guy that if he had been able to stay healthy, we might not even be having this conversation about Rodney Thomas. So I agree. I think that you're looking at a guy that you got to say, hey, I mean, $3.34 million isn't in the NFL. That's chunk change. That's absolute, that's pissing away money. That's nothing for any of these GMs or front office people. But when you can save some money by getting rid of a guy that overall is a liability, it's a little bit, it makes a little bit more sense. But at the end of the day, what are your thoughts on the safety room behind Rodney Thomas? Because we are looking at guys like, you got Trevor Denbo, strong safety. You got Ronnie Harrison Jr., and of course Daniel Scott, who you can't even bank on being healthy. Do you think that cutting Rodney Thomas, while it saves money, it might be foolhardy, even though there is a free agent class of safeties you can pick up that aren't necessarily starters that could fill his role, and you could also pick up plenty of names in the draft to fill in for depth?
Yeah, even the guys you named, Ronnie Harrison, Trevor Denbo, aren't under contract. I think so. Really, the only one you are bringing back, you've got essentially, if we take Rodney Thomas out of the equation, Nick Cross, Marcel Dabo, and Daniel Scott. So you've got an international pathway program player who's had a roster exemption the past 3 years. You've got Daniel Scott, who hasn't played a down, and then you've got your other starting safety. So really, you've got nobody. So it would make sense if they wanted to have somebody on the roster just for numbers' sakes. But I mean, you could get 2 veteran minimum signings at safety for the amount that you're paying Rodney Thomas. You just, I think, have to operate under the assumption that this safety room is completely empty, not just of talent, but of numbers in general. So you're going to need bodies there regardless. I think getting rid of Rodney Thomas just means one more undrafted free agent that you sign at defensive back after the draft to bring into camp. I mean, yeah, you've got nothing behind him, absolutely nothing, so it would make sense to keep him. But I think you're going to make so many moves at safety anyway that'll all be water under the bridge come training camp and OTAs.
Yeah, and look, it's never easy to cut a player, but sometimes it just makes sense. Sometimes the on-field performance isn't really that great, and you also can save a couple million, and you can bring in other talent that might be better or make more sense than Rodney Thomas does. So we'll have to see what happens there. But I definitely think that that's probably one that you can be okay parting ways with. To answer your question, Gafia, he didn't even make the roster. He's not even with the Colts, and there was a couple guys actually from the 2023 draft class or 2024 draft class that didn't even make it. I know another guy was Jonah Laulu, a defensive tackle. He didn't make it. He didn't make the roster. So some of those draft picks, some of those guys that typically the Colts do hit on, they just didn't this year. So we'll have to see. But that's something else, because that was a safety. I think that they were trying. It's either that he was a safety they were trying to get to play cornerback, or a cornerback they were trying to get to play safety.
Yeah, he was a safety in college, Jalen Simpson, who is on the Jets currently, but contract might be ending. So either way, I don't think the Colts had enough interest to that's going to be a reunion.
Yeah. So now this next one is interesting, and that's Tyquan Lewis. Yeah. This is a guy that the Colts they love him. I mean, he obviously had those, I believe it was Achilles ruptures. If I'm not mistaken, he had 8 games played in 21, 7 played in 2022. And then he had 8 games played in 2018, 9 games played in 2019. Finally played a full season last year and provided solid pressure off the edge. He did a good job in a depth role, $4.79 million saved. Now, when you look at the depth chart here behind Tyquan Lewis or around Tyquan Lewis, it actually looks pretty okay. You're not too worried about the defensive end depth, but what are your thoughts on Tyquan Lewis? He also only played 10 games last season. This is a guy that, you got to be honest, in the NFL, he's really, 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 really injury prone. Like he's injured all the time. What are your thoughts on Lewis here?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things you need to consider. I don't think this is an easy yes or no for
Yeah.
Taekwon Lewis, because I think there's some other guys in the same position group that you're making some decisions on that'll kind of sway you one way or the other, and you're kind of deciding, do we keep him, or if we're keeping all of them. Because I don't think it would be unusual or unheard of if the Colts just say they like where they're at defensive line, and keep all these guys that are on the roster. Yeah, health's going to be a big thing also, and then he's one of the few guys. I think he's maybe the only guy playing edge right now on the Colts roster that you can bump inside as a defensive tackle or in the interior on pass downs. Yeah, you're not going to do that with Kwity Paye or Ebukam or Latu, not on a consistent basis at least. So I think he's going to be the only guy that's going to give you that flexibility. And I know in the past the Colts have loved those kind of guys that are versatile on the D line. The new scheme might have something to say about that. Maybe that's not as valuable, so maybe they're not as worried about holding on to a guy like that. But I think there's other ways to free up money that hurts you a little bit less. I think it would be a punch to the rotation on defensive line if you got rid of Taekwon Lewis and you went in a different direction. So yeah, I mean, we'll talk about a couple of these other guys that they have the opportunity to move on from and save a little bit more money. That may be a lesser hit, or and maybe even a bigger hit. But yeah, I think Taekwon Lewis, there's going to be a lot of decisions that have to be made. And along the defensive line, his decision is not going to be made in a vacuum like I think someone like Rodney Thomas would.
Yeah, and again, Taekwon Lewis provides pressure.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of his best things. Is he's a great rotational piece, and while he has been hurt, when he is healthy, I mean, I think that he was like third on the team in pressures in 2023 behind DeForest Buckner and Samson Ebukam.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Taekwon Lewis makes it happen. He had only 4 sacks last year, only 1.5 this year, but he did have his tied for second most tackles in a season in just 10 games. So this is a guy who definitely can play at a high motor. He's that NASCAR package type dude. He's fast off the line of scrimmage. He can give tackles some issues. And if you take out a Leatu Latu, take out a Kwity Paye, you put in Lewis, you're not missing really much of a beat. And like you also mentioned, and a couple other people mentioned in the chat, you're talking about a guy who's versatile. You're talking about a dude that you can move and you can put him more on the interior. I agree with you. I think this is a guy that if you can and it makes sense, you are going to keep him. It is interesting, though, that given all of his injury history, given all the games that he's missed, and the fact that he's not a higher end type of player, $4.79 million. Now we're starting to get into the area of, hey, this isn't just $1 million. This isn't a couple million. You're starting to get close to $5 million, and of course you can do something with that. So, but yeah, we'll see. That's going to be one to monitor. I still think the Colts, literally personally, I think that they love Taekwon Lewis and what he provides. He's also a great guy. So this next one we had no choice but to put it on here. I know that people in the chat are probably going to be like, oh, heck no. He is 30 plus years old, though. Keep that in mind, even though it really doesn't matter. And that is Grover Stewart. Okay, so you save $6.25 million by cutting Grover. Obviously, this one is a no, okay? But again, we have to play devil's advocate here. If you were to move on from Grover Stewart, boy, you are looking at DeForest Buckner on an island. Now, I think that what we'll do here is we'll maneuver it to a different side of the argument. Grover Stewart hasn't really shown any signs of regression. His value on this team, what did you make of his 2024? I thought Grover actually improved in several areas. I don't really think he's ever going to be that pass rushing defensive tackle like his counterpart Buckner is. But what are your thoughts on Grover? What are your thoughts on his potential future with the team? And I mean, you do save $6.25 million, but it doesn't really sound like too much when you're talking about Big Grove here being released.
Yeah, for sure. I think you feel it when Grover's not on the field. This is, I think, more of a conversation that I'm willing to have instead of Kenny Moore for $1.24 million and Jonathan Taylor for $3.29 million. I think Grover Stewart, you'd feel less of an impact moving on from Grover Stewart. And gain more financially. But I don't think that 6.25 number is a big enough number to replace the production that he's able to give you in the run game. Like you said, I'm not sure he's going to ever be that pass rushing defensive tackle like Buckner. I think there was some promise there. There was word that he was working on that in the offseason a couple years ago, and he came out, I think, early in that 2023 season, 2023 season, and was showing good pressure and got some sacks, and then he just kind of fell back to how he was, but still dominant in the run game. And that's what he is, and that's why you pay him. And you're going to need that in every defensive scheme, no matter what. One thing about him, he's going to turn 32 pretty early on in the season next year. So you're talking about a guy that's maybe aging into a bit of regression. So maybe you see that start to fall off. But I think that happens a little bit slower for interior defensive linemen, especially if you're not asking him to play on all three downs. So I think you're safe from Father Time there on Grover Stewart. I don't think the regression's going to hit him so soon. So I mean, there's those bits of the conversation that you can have, but I think pretty much every angle that you attack that conversation from, you end up thinking, no, we're fine with spending this much on Grover Stewart.
Yeah, when you talk about Grover Stewart and when you talk about DeForest Buckner, you talk about two of the stalwarts on this team. You talk about arguably on any given Sunday the best defensive tackle duo you can find. All right, you can pay. And yeah, Grover might not be this guy who's going to get 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 sacks. He's not Dexter Lawrence, okay. Most guys aren't. I would even say Dexter Lawrence is better than DeForest Buckner. So, but this is one that you need to pay until the wheels fall off. I know somebody in the chat mentioned, hey, draft is replacement. Draft is replacement. There's some damn good defensive tackles. Walter Nolan, chef's kiss of a defensive tackle, especially in Senior Bowl week. He was just dominant type of guy. But until it happens, you got to keep him. And like you mentioned, I love that you put out there. Some of these guys play till they're like 35.
Yeah.
Like these defensive tackles, you would think that they're going to fall apart because they're hitting these offensive linemen. No, man, some of these guys are like 35, 36. And Ndamukong Suh played until it seemed like he was 40. Like, so I think that this is one we had to put on the list. Obviously, you're keeping Grove. Now, this next one, this is one that's a very real possibility.
Yeah.
Raekwon Davis. All right, so in short, 2 years, $14 million, comes from the Miami Dolphins. You get this guy so that he can back up mostly, I would say, Grover, because he is more of your run defender. He's a big, huge, just a massive guy. All these guys are, but I mean, Raekwon's like 6'7". Okay, he is just massive. He's a gap plugger. Didn't have a good year at all. Just did not have a good season. Pro Football Focus, we have to always say this. It's not the Bible, but especially when it comes to like coverage, blocking, pass rush, defensive line, offensive line, I really put it into more account when it's when we're talking about the trenches. 1 to 100 is the mark. Generally, awful is like underneath 50. 37 overall, 38.5 run defense. This is a guy that really did not do what you brought him in to do. And he might have been dealing with some struggles and injury. I don't know there was something going on with like high blood pressure or something like that. You saved $6.49 million. By the way, the fourth most on this list. Do you go with Raekwon Davis for another season? At this point, I think if you don't, you probably are looking to the draft or maybe in free agency for a depth guy. What were your thoughts on Raekwon Davis's 2024?
Yeah, we just had the discussion about Grover Stewart. When you have the opportunity to save 6.25 moving on from him, maybe makes you think a little bit, but you stop thinking about that when you immediately see the guy below him on the depth chart. You save more moving on from him. That's the kind of impact that you're not going to feel nearly as much if you're desperate to make a move in free agency or wiggle that cap space. He's really at the top of the chopping block there. You mentioned that PFF grade. I think that's pretty in line with most of his career, has been subpar to bad. So at this point, maybe you know what he is, right? And you're not really expecting on any progression or anything like that. He's just going to play how he played, which is maybe as a rotational run stopping kind of guy only. I know he wasn't that good stopping the run last year, but I think maybe that's where his only chance is of really making it, playing in a role that makes sense for what his contract would be at that point. And I think he's, compensated well over what the Colts got out of him last year and what they should expect to get out of him next year.
Right now, it looks like a bad contract.
Yeah.
It just does. It doesn't look like a good contract at all. And I think he's very cuttable. I think that, unless they're seeing something and they're saying, okay, well, this is why he had such a bad season. We understand. We know what he can do. I just think that this could be a one and done type thing. Again, you can draft better players. There's going to be defensive tackles that you can just sign that are probably going to provide you with that. Then you're talking about the depth. I mean, you got Taven Bryan, who is also an unrestricted free agent right now. So that's probably a guy you're not bringing back on yet another 1-year deal. And this is a guy that you might cut and save some money, and you're saving money by not bringing Bryan back. Now that leaves 2 depth tackle positions you got to fill. But I mean, you probably aren't really losing much sleep if you get rid of Davis. I mean, do you think that the Indianapolis Colts are really going to miss, like I'm talking about, like Lou Anarumo, that defensive line, that defensive scheme, Charlie Partridge, whatever? Do you think that if we're just going based off of his career and we're going based off of last season, that he's really that much of an asset, especially for $7 million a year? I don't know about that, man.
Yeah, and you were talking about the depth that might be behind him, and it's moving on from Raekwon Davis. He's really the only one that could fill that role behind Grover Stewart. Your other guy is Adetomiwa Adebawore, right? Who's not you don't want him to play nose tackle at least. I mean, that hasn't stopped the Colts in the past from playing guys out of position on the defensive line. Then you've got Feldarius Payne, who was signed off the practice squad to a reserve future deal, which I don't think you're really factoring in as anything more than competition at camp. So yeah, you're going to need to make investments assuming that you're not bringing Taven Bryan back. I would like to think that they're not bringing Taven Bryan back. I think $6.49 million is enough to generate a couple of veteran signings, maybe on the lower end at defensive tackle, and you can use that money better elsewhere.
Yeah, this was not a hard one for me and Noah. We didn't talk about where we were going, individually, because we like to wait for all the content on the live show. But it's just so funny because me and Noah are both like, oh yeah, that's an easy decision. I mean, the personal, factors removed. It makes fiscal sense to do it, and it also makes performance sense to do that. So obviously this next one, hell of a 2023. Led the team in sacks actually in 2023. Doesn't play at all in 2024. Samson Ebukam. All right. This one is tough for me because he was when he got signed, people were like, who is this guy? You look at his stats, he was nothing but a rotational guy. Hello, he played with the Rams and Aaron Donald and a bunch of solid defensive ends. Then he goes and plays with Nick Bosa and the 49ers and just an absolute slew. I think Eric Armstead was on that team at that time. No wonder the guy didn't get on the field, and then he goes to the Colts and you see starter potential. Boom. He's second on the team in pressures, or either first or second. I can't remember. Boom, leads the team in sacks. He had a phenomenal run defense prowess. I mean, the guy played lights out football in 2023. He was in constant plays, had one of the coolest still images I've ever seen where he's just looks like he's just the Hulk against the Steelers. And then he just doesn't even play last year. You have that season-ending injury before anything even gets going. What are your thoughts on this one? Because I think this one, while it sounds like it makes sense because, we got hurt and this and that, if he comes back healthy, it might get Samson Ebukam in 2023, and that was damn near 10 sacks.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this one's up in the air, but I'm more on the side of if you have a talented edge rusher on your roster, don't move on from him. And he is that. I think the injury complicates things. Achilles injuries are hard to come back from, take quite a bit, especially if you're playing on the edge where that first step is so important and you're relying on that explosive power, and that's all being generated on the back of your leg right there. So you have to hope he's 100% from the injury and you're not worried about what that may be affected long term. I'd have to look up his age exactly. I think he's right around 28, 29. So maybe that's a factor when you're thinking about him coming back from that injury. There's other guys in the edge group that you need to make decisions on in conjunction with this, like we talked about with Tyquan Lewis. Tyquan Lewis is one of those guys. Saw in the chat Daniel Miller mentioning re-signing Dio to an extension instead of Ebukam. Dio's a guy that you have to consider when you're talking about this, because with all of the guys, if you bring back Dio, that's maybe too many cooks in the kitchen at edge in terms of getting snaps. You want all that rotation on the defensive line, but I mean, that's a lot of investment when you've got Kwity Paye on his 5th-year option, and you've got Ebukam on his contract, and you've got Latu with his first-round contract, and then Dio, whatever he's going to command on an extension. That's a lot of money invested into that group when you've got plenty of needs elsewhere in terms of depth and talented starters at some spots. So I don't think you're going to come back into 2025 with Dio and Kwity and Latu and Ebukam and Lewis all in the same group. I think odds are one of them's got to go. I think it's more, man, it's hard to say. If I don't know if I can make a prediction on that. I almost did, and I'm just going to hold off on that. We'll do that another show, right? I think the edge group could have it. They could have it their own show, I think, at some point. Man, $8 million. If you really need it, it's there. I hesitate moving on from a guy that gave you that production, right? Especially at such a valuable position, and when you've got Latu on the roster who you think can come along but hasn't quite hit it yet, and you've got Kwity Paye who hasn't quite hit where you want him to be yet. I mean, you don't have that number one guy that you're banking on at this point in terms of production and what they've proven, and hopefully Ebukam can be that guy if he comes back from injury.
This was the dude that Latu was supposed to play behind. Mm-hmm. Like, that's what the Colts thought of Samson Ebukam. They took Latu 15th overall, and they looked at Ebukam as the starter, basically. Okay, I say you don't touch the guy. You need to let him play out that 3rd year of his contract. If he sucks, if he is regressing, if he gets hurt again, maybe then you figure something out. If he can't stay healthy, hey, all bets are off at that point, because bad health, bad injuries in general, man, you could be the cat's meow of the NFL at any position, and it's not going to matter because you can't get on the field. But I think that if he comes back to health, man, you've got yourself like 6, 7, 8 sacks, and he's a pressure machine, and he's a great run defender, and he could help Latu. I think that this is a guy you just leave alone. Now, this next one is just absolutely stupid, but we have no choice to put it on there. Big Q. You're going to cut Big Q? No. But at the end of the day, I do want to talk about, his impact on this team. I know that he's a stalwart. $10 million saved if he does get cut. He ain't getting cut. He's not going anywhere. Guy's probably retiring a Colt. If anything, 7 straight Pro Bowls. He continued his dominance, but what I really want to use this for is to talk about the depth behind Quentin Nelson. So you're looking at guys like, on the depth chart, they have Danny Pinter, Tanner Bortolini. On the other side, you got Mark Lewinsky and Dalton Tucker. Do you think that, Tanner Bortolini might end up starting. Do you think that the Colts should consider drafting somebody to back up Quentin Nelson? Because he's been healthy as hell. He hardly ever gets hurt, and he hardly ever has a down game. I think he had one bad game last year. And it was the Lions, which nobody had a good game in that one. But do you think that this is a position that minus Quentin Nelson is pretty thin? Or do you think that guys like Danny Pinter, even though I think he is a free agent, guys like Dalton Tucker, Mark Lewinsky, do you think that they need to really address that? Because it looks pretty thin behind 56.
Yeah, especially with all the guys that are pending free agents right now. There's a lot of decisions that need to be made on guys like Braden Smith and how that situation resolves, and Ryan Kelly and his free agency, and Will Fries and his free agency. I think if you have that same starting 5 that you went into this season with, and you've still got Matt Gonsalves who can play guard or tackle, and you've got Bortolini who can play guard or center, I think you feel pretty good about your depth there. And maybe there's some smaller investments, but I can't imagine that all of those guys are coming back, right? You may be moving on from 2. Maybe Will Fries comes back. Maybe Braden Smith's still there, so you're at least probably... 4 out of 5 would be a good situation, I think, for the Colts, because I don't think you're bringing back all 5. And just then that drastically drops if Ryan Kelly's the one that moves on, that your main interior swing guy is off the roster, right? So you have nobody really backing up either of those guard spots for Fries, who's coming off an injury, and Quentin Nelson, who I mean, as durable as he's been, the injury bug it can't avoid everybody for throughout a whole career. No one goes through a whole career not missing games, right? So, yeah, you need somebody at some point. I think maybe tackle would be somebody. You want somebody who can play tackle and guard. I think in the same kind of vein as Gonsalves, right, where he can play guard and tackle. I think you go for somebody similar like that with a similar type investment in the second or third round. I think would be nice. Or even a veteran guy on the free agents that you would trust really starting at 4 out of the 5 line spots.
Yeah, at the end of the day, first off, Quentin Nelson ain't going anywhere. $10 million to cut a guy like Quentin.
Yeah.
If you were even saving $30 million, it's not worth it. This is arguably one of the most terrifying guards in the NFL. When that guy pulls and he's out in the open and he's got a guy behind him with the football, get the hell out of his way. He's going to hurt you. like one of those kind of things. But this last one, and we saved it for last because it's honestly the most murky. And that's Braden Smith. $16.75 million. So many things factoring into this. Mm-hmm. Didn't really play that great last season. He's got the personal issue going on, which we're not at liberty to talk about that, so we will not. But it's been constant. I mean, the injury reports, I would cover the injury reports every week for our site. You would always see Braden Smith on it. Every single time. Now, it was always maintenance stuff like a knee, an ankle, but it was always there. And I think that it's starting to really add up, taking away the personal issue entirely. What do you make of his 2024? Matt Gonsalves did not play like lights out because he's a third-round rookie. But what do you make of Braden Smith? I mean, if we're taking away the personal matter, the injuries are starting to pile up, and it looks like it's starting to take a toll on his in-game performances to a degree.
Yeah. Yeah, you worry about that for sure. It always seems like he's battling through something. You're talking about the injury reports. Yeah, he's constantly on there.
Oh, he's always on
with multiple issues. At the same time, I mean, I know this is the highest number that we've covered, right? 16.75 million is what they can save from cutting him. Man, you want a right tackle you can count on. I think Braden Smith's the closest thing you're going to find to that. I don't think you're going to find somebody in free agency that you can sign for 16.75 million as a tackle that you feel as good about as you do about Braden Smith. And if you do, I think you're taking a long shot there. So I think it's a little bit safer to go with the guy than take a risk on somebody that you don't really know and haven't had in the building. If you're going to get the same kind of production for the same kind of cost, I think it's just a really popular name because of the murkiness of the situation, and we don't know how anything's going to turn out. I think if a player doesn't play for a while, I think fans tend to think like, oh, we've moved on already. They have one foot out the door already, so it's easier, I think, in our heads to contemplate moving on and imagine what the possibilities would be like without him. Also, when you have Gonsalves, who didn't necessarily like blow the world away with his play at tackle, he's a rookie. That's exciting, right? To move on from it and have a starter at tackle under a rookie contract, I think is a valuable thing for a team to have, and teams should chase that. For next year at least, they have that with Bernard Ryman. They don't need to on a rookie deal. I don't think there's enough out there in free agency for them to need this 16.75 million badly enough to move on from somebody like Braden Smith.
Yeah, and Rich Wheeler professing his love for Isaiah Land here. So, hey, Isaiah Land's a hell of an athlete. He's a guy that I think can provide a lot of depth. But this is a really interesting comment. So Blake Freeland and Matt Gonsalves can both compete for the right tackle spot if Braden Smith doesn't return or wants to retire. I would dare say that Matt Gonsalves is going to win that one because Blake Freeland is a backup swing tackle. But that's interesting. You did invest your third and fourth round selections in a center and in a tackle. So we'll have to see what happens with that. But yes, this is one that it might seem like it makes sense, people. Braden Smith, even when he's about 75, 80%, is better than probably 75 to 80% of the right tackles in the NFL. I mean, he is a run blocking stud. He's been snubbed for a Pro Bowl. I know that his injuries have piled up, and you have seen a little bit of regression, but that's just somebody you can't just like say, okay, we got Matt Gonsalves, he played okay, even though Braden Smith played pretty good. Let's just get rid of him and save 16.75. I don't even know what you would spend that on if you get rid of a guy that is the caliber of Braden Smith. So that pretty much gets to the end of the list. And now we have like 4 or 5 things in the news and rumors. So we're going to try to get to those. That's why we're kind of zooming through these. But realistically, who do you cut? So I'll start with you, Noah. Off this list, now keep in mind, people, there's probably going to be like 1 or 2 or 3, right? Because a lot of these guys are secure and they're very, very key and important to the success of the team, even if it means 8-9 or 9-8, hopefully playoffs in 2025. But who do you realistically cut? We'll each give our own. We'll start with Noah.
Man, I think our answers are going to be pretty similar here, just based on how we were talking. Yeah, we're going through the list. You mentioned this with Braden Smith. What are you going to spend the money on when you get it? Right, the Colts need to have a plan there. I know fans are going to put together their dream free agent wish list. Right, I think Chris Ballard's list is going to look quite a bit different than what a lot of fans, if the last 8 years have taught us anything. 28 million is enough to maneuver in free agency, so he's got enough wiggle room to make the kind of moves that he's made in the past. So I'm not sure there's going to be a ton of cuts here. If we're going down the list of guys that we covered, Rodney Thomas at 3.34 million, he'd free up, and then Raekwon Davis at 6.49 million, saves you about 10. I'm bad at math. 10, yeah, right around 10 million. I think that's the extent of what I would do. With the amount of information that I have, obviously there's some decisions to make with the injuries on Samson Ebukam and the situation going on with Braden Smith. But all the other guys that we listed, I'd be comfortable keeping and wouldn't expect the Colts to move on from either.
Yeah, and obviously I agree. I agree with you. I think that Rodney Thomas has shown that he is a liability in coverage, which guess what? The Indianapolis Colts defense was so roller coaster last season that they allowed guys like Drew Lock, they allowed guys like even Mac Jones to a degree to carve him up, and Drake May on a bad, like awful offense to carve them up. So you need better safety than that. I think that you are okay with getting rid of Rodney Thomas and Raekwon Davis, man. If he would have even had a little bit better of a season, even an underwhelming season, you're okay keeping him. He was awful. He just was not good. Like he was a revolving door. And Taven Bryan, I know that he gets a bunch of flack. He was better than Raekwon Davis and actually has a better case to stay on the team than Raekwon Davis does, in my humble opinion. At this point, actually, you're saving more money and probably paying Bryant less if you decided to keep him for another year. But I agree. I think that out of all these guys, maybe Samson Ebukam. But I look at him and I say, 1 year ago he led the team in sacks. That's all I say to myself. Is all he is one healthy year away from coming right back to 7-8 sacks, which you'll take any day. And that's what Kwity Paye did for you last year. So the end of the day, it's not easy, but we're going to go ahead and get to these Colts news and rumors. We're going to try to get through all of these as quickly as possible without sounding like like we're fast forwarding. Number one, and we got to get to this one right away. Myles Garrett requests a trade. This guy's a world eater. I mean, he destroys offensive lines. He had over 80 pressures by himself. Did you know that that's more than the I think that the guy who led the Colts in pressures was Dio Dangbo with like 42. That's double the Colts leader in pressures. Do you think the Colts should at least kick the tires on this? I mean, you're looking at 2 first-rounders. You're probably looking at a prominent player, probably more draft picks. This is a guy that whoever does trade for him, probably a Super Bowl contender.
Yeah. Obviously, I think everybody should at least be interested at some price. That price is obviously going to be a lot higher for some other teams. If I was so Chris Ballard, I think would be okay with this. Jim Irsay, if I was the owner, I would not let Chris Ballard trade away any picks beyond 2025. Right, so 2 first-rounders would be out of the question because I'd want to hold those on in my back pocket for whatever changes may be coming up in 2026. So I mean, I'd be okay if it's a guy I think just based off of mock trades that I've seen floated around. Named Kwity Paye gets thrown out quite a bit. If you include Kwity Paye and the 14th pick this year, I think that'd be a trade I'd be comfortable making. But I wouldn't be comfortable moving a 2026 first round with the state that the Colts are in right now.
Yeah, and it's always great to have a Miles Garrett, but I also don't think he would, unless they paid him a stupid amount of money, which I think he's making 25 million a year
Mhm.
right now. I mean, boy, oh boy, for a defensive end, that is a lot of dough, Ray me, to pay a defensive player. But again, this is arguably the best defensive end that I've seen in the last decade. So, of course, the next one is Michael Pittman Jr., and I think that Jonathan Taylor also said something, but this one was really prominent. He said about AR, at times I felt like everybody was throwing shots at him. Now, this is during the Super Bowl interviews and stuff. What are your thoughts on that? Do you agree with that? Do you think that AR might have taken a little too much flack for his 2024 season? I don't think that he did take too much flack. I think he took just enough.
I think he might have taken too much, right? I think everything that all of the flack that he got was warranted. I think some situations went on a little bit too long, just because of the amount of press it got. I think Pat McAfee talking about the tap out thing and then the continued feud with Zaire Franklin just kind of stirred that pot over and over and over again, which I think
Sure.
Anthony Richardson was getting caught in the crosshairs of what was going on there quite a bit. So I think that's fair. It's good to see MPJ come out and defend his quarterback, right? I think that's always a good sign. I don't think I've ever seen any Colts player not defend Anthony Richardson, so that's good to see. Just in terms of how you feel about the chemistry of the locker room and how he's leading that group there. It seems like at least outwardly all the players are on board, and I think with other franchises, when you see them struggling and issues with the quarterback, I think some players are pretty quick to come out and say they want to see a change there or see a veteran guy come in and take over. And the Colts players have not been like that at all. They're still 100% behind him. So that just reinforces that sense for me. And that's really kind of all I got out of those comments there.
Yeah, and look, what I meant is more like on field performance. So I think as the guy, yeah, I think that people were a little too hard on him. I also think that you can only know what you know, and you got Shane Steichen saying that he had back soreness when he was really crawling around
Mhm.
in his house with a freaking back spasm. Okay, so I wouldn't even be surprised if he didn't know he wasn't supposed to do that. Yeah, common sense tells you one thing, but guess what he said in the interviews with the media afterward? I was tired. I ain't gonna lie. Like, where is the? They gotta get in the ear of him and Steichen and tell them to talk to the media better.
Hire a
I think
PR
that's
coach. The whole organization needs to. I know they've got a PR team already, but get juice that budget up a little bit and bring some more people in.
that's very fair. The next one is last two here. Bengals Trey Hendrickson on Lou Anarumo. We're talking about a guy who has 35 sacks over the last 2 years, 17.5 each season.
Mhm.
A leader of elite men. What does that mean to you? I think it means that he is coming into this job with Indianapolis and he is ready to mean business. His reputation was kind of tarnished last season a little
Yeah.
bit with how rough that defense looked at times outside of Hendrickson. I think he's ready to prove a point.
Yeah. Yeah, a leader. I think a lot of people were hoping for just some sort of a shift in dynamic between the defensive coaches and the defensive players, just based off of how last season ended out and some of the comments that happened to the locker room cleanup that was going on there. Yeah, I think Anarumo is in a sense that he does seem very much that no nonsense guy, while Gus Bradley seems a little bit more friendly. Maybe more of a player's coach, people would say, while Anarumo is kind of more down to business. That's all I really have on their personalities. I'm excited to see how this next year goes with Anarumo and see kind of some of those interactions and see what more players say as training camp goes on and those press conferences with Anarumo goes and see kind of how those players are responding to that shift in the coaching style.
Yeah, and this is going to be a big year for Anarumo because he was a high profile addition. I
Mhm.
mean, he really was. And I know Gus Bradley had his moments where he wasn't very good, but he was still well respected. Already found another job with Robert Sala in San Francisco. The last one is the one we might have to get at least a couple minutes to talk about it. Reggie Wayne and Adam Vinatieri are not going into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. This is Vinatieri's first time getting told no, but it's Reggie Wayne's umpteenth.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on this? Do you think that it's justified? I personally am asking why the guy who is the all-time leading scorer isn't a first ballot Hall of Famer. But what are your thoughts on it? Because I know Reggie Wayne was pretty upset. He voiced it on
Yeah.
X.
Yeah, they're both disappointing, weird in different ways, right? If Adam Vinatieri's not in as a first ballot Hall of Famer, The no kicker's ever going to go in as a first ballot Hall of Famer. I don't know what else you could do to be it. But the only thing working against him is that he was a kicker. And I mean, that's just what it was, right? You can't
discrimination.
do more than yeah, it is. You just file a class action. I think you can't do more for Vinatieri, right? And I think the voting, the way that voting has changed, they're trying to be a little bit more exclusive with who gets in. Because it was a smaller group than it has been in years past. Man, it's difficult to say without the scope of having seen kind of everybody who's been in the past and knowing how their careers were, and not being able to see those. But I mean, this one's like super personal for us as Colts fans, and super personal for at least people of our age, Drake, watching these two, and kind of growing up with them and seeing that greatness. I mean, in terms of people that have put on the horseshoe in my lifetime, or people that have put on the horseshoe in Indianapolis in general, there's not much better than those two. So it stings definitely this fan base to not see one Adam Vinatieri not going in on the first ballot, which I think first ballot doesn't matter as much as it did before, because there's guys that should have been first ballots in many cases that they just don't get in. And then man, Reggie Wayne's been waiting. Been a finalist for the past 5 years, right?
God.
And I get that they've had guys on the waiting list for such a long time, and there's been this log jam at receiver for such a long time. I mean, Marvin Harrison wasn't a first ballot Hall of Famer, which I still think is insane. So I didn't really expect that of Reggie Wayne. I don't know how long it's going to be, and I don't know what the rules. I mean, they both have to get in at some point. It just sucks that they have to wait as long as they're waiting.
Reggie Wayne had the second most receptions of his entire career, with one Andrew Luck as a rookie. 106 catches, and we're talking about all those years with Peyton Manning.
Mm-hmm.
111 was his zenith. That was his best. Adam Vinatieri, though, what the hell are we doing? Yeah. This is a guy who won Super Bowls for the Patriots. He won a Super Bowl with the Colts. I mean, he sealed so many games, like Patrick Ryan mentioned. I mean, just the countless clutch kicks. Like you said, this is the cream of the crop for kicker. What else are you supposed to do? Like, you know what I mean? So we'll have to see what happens next season. Those guys got snubbed. But look, we're approaching an hour and 10 minutes, guys. That's our show. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's never easy to talk about cap cuts and cuts in general, but at the end of the day, a couple of those are very likely to happen. But if you like the show, please go follow us on X. I'm D. Walster Drake. He's Noah Gebert. Like the Horseshoe Huddle on Facebook. Follow Indianapolis Colts on SI on X, at Colts on SI. And then subscribe to the Horseshoe Huddle on YouTube. Click the bell if you want to listen. We are on Apple. We're on Spotify. We're on Google Play. We're on everything where you listen to your podcasts. We will return next week on Monday and Thursday yet again, because we had a little bit of a schedule change this time to continuously bring you the dog days of the offseason Colts content. But we've got the combine coming up. We got free agency coming up. We've got, the draft coming up here in a little bit. So we will definitely be pelting you guys with plenty of content. But until then, everyone have a wonderful Friday and have a great weekend. We'll be talking to you soon.